we can start with the interview.
Sounds great.
We are now recording. Great. So, hi, Georg. Nice to see you again. We met yesterday for your masterclass, and now we will talk a bit about your film, the one that you will screen for this year, which is a world premiere here. So we are very, very glad and honored for this. Can you hear us well?
Yeah, no, you're coming through loud and clear. And thank you again, Laura. It's so great to be here with you, and so excited to show the film for the first time.
Great.
So thank you.
For us, it's the same. I just wanted to remember to everybody that it premiered yesterday evening, and it will be available to watch online until the end of the festival, the 18th of October. So for those who still haven't watched it, it's online. You can watch it. So let's start asking something about your film. The film is called New Mexico Deathwish Diatribe. And it's a film where three narrators, as you said, converge in the desert of New Mexico, each one with a different story to tell. One is Robert Oppenheimer. The second is a visitor from outer space, and the third narrator is you. So the first question I had is, okay, what's the story behind this film? What brought you to shoot this film, and also why did you choose three narrators for this story and those specific ones?
Yeah, for sure, Laura. And let me know if my audio, I can just cut my video if my audio starts to lag, as it sometimes does.
For the moment, we can hear you well.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, we'll take it as it comes. And yeah, I mean, this project is part of this larger cycle of films, this Anthropocene cycle of experimental documentaries. I don't even know if you could call them documentaries. This film has elements of science fiction and documentary and film essay, but the film previous, Continents Quiver as Memories Erupt into Earth Flames, we screened together last year here. This is essentially the second film in that cycle. And it's a continuation of my kind of exploration, this study of all matters of the Anthropocene, and this basic premise that human interactions with Earth systems are deeply problematic, to say the absolute least, like leading towards what, the sixth mass extinction event that we're in, which is exceedingly rare in the history of life on Earth, 3.5 billion years. And one of the key golden spikes for this proposed epoch of the Anthropocene is roughly 1945, July 16, 1945. To pick a specific moment would be this detonation of the atom bomb in the deserts of New Mexico. And so thinking about all this, it also occurred to me, I'm thinking about the grand, deep time, geologic time and deep time, thinking on this time scale of billions of years, and then thinking, why not go back to the initial explosion, the Big Bang, roughly 13.5 or 13.8 billion years ago. And thinking about a time period from that moment, the beginning of time and space as we know it, to July 16, 1945, the early morning hours when that atom was split, in this decisive moment in human history. And then, I'm not making a documentary. I feel like if somebody wants to learn about the detonation of the atom bomb, there are great books to read on the subject. The first secret, because the United States now has these secret military bases all over the world that are being, things are happening without the approval of the American people. Los Alamos was the first such incident, first such moment in US history where this was happening, the secret base And, thinking about all this history is important and vital, but the film work doesn't really do that. It's not really meant to be educational in the traditional sense, really about a convergence of perspectives, voices, thinking about different time scales. So, human time scale, when you think about the last 100 years or 20th century history, geologic time scale, when we think about the implications of that atom bomb detonation, and the over 2,000 atom bombs been detonated since. And folks don't know that, but you could argue we've been at war with the planet for a long time, having detonated, over 2,000 of these atom and hydrogen bombs. The United States responsible for over half of those. So again, the film isn't a history lesson like that, but those things are part of what I was studying and continue to study and find ways of engaging in the film work. So the three voices that you asked about, it seemed imperative to include J. Robert Oppenheimer. This is the guy, for folks that don't know, he's the scientist tasked with putting together that team at Los Alamos to create the atom bomb. And he's kind of referred to as the American Prometheus. In fact, there's a really great book about him called American Prometheus, in that he is that god of fire, so to speak. Or you think of Frankenstein, as the modern tale of Prometheus. In other words, this great price that's paid for this desire for fire, desire for knowledge, desire for life, in the case of Frankenstein. And he spends the rest of his life really as an anti-nuclear activist, saying, look, what we did here, we have to put this in check or it's going to lead to our collective demise. But nobody listened to him, and he made the decision, he did the work, so I have his voice in there, but it's really almost more of the soundscape. It's not as if we're giving Oppenheimer this space to make an argument. We hear this lecture that he gave, and he has this very monotone voice. It's almost like music. Like I think of the film, also the soundtrack, as a piece of music with these three voices, just like you would use, a cello and maybe a piano and a violin. You go, these are three voices and they're speaking to one another in dialogue. He's one. And then, my voice, I feel like the tradition of the film essay has to be personal. It's always personal. What else could it be? But, the author, his perspectives. So I'm bringing in my own perspectives as I'm, in the middle of the desert of New Mexico. I just drove out to the Trinity site in this rental car. I flew to Albuquerque and drove like 5 or 6 hours to all the sites in the film, just roaming without just with a camera. And writing those reflections, and those reflections become part of the film. But then the third voice, and this is where I'm really interested. I mean, I think like a lot of the filmmakers that you screen, and poets, right? It's like what's possible within the form. And this distinction between fiction and nonfiction, in the film essay tradition, blurred constantly. It's actually almost one of the main ingredients, this like pushing the boundaries between the two. But personally, I'm interested in the different, the differences and connections between documentary and science fiction. I mean, now more than ever, you could say that gap is narrowing profoundly. Like we feel like we're living in a science fiction world, but we're not. It's just very dystopian in a lot of ways. And that voice from another planet is, for me anyway, of course, all the voices are my own. I mean, that's true of every creative writing, ever created in the history of humanity. All the voices come from the author. But that's this voice that looks at humanity critically, almost like the early 20th century ethnographers who were very colonizer mindset. They're projecting their own ideas onto the indigenous communities that they were encountering. And I imagine this alien entity looking at us as inferior species. And, at one point says, this androgynous voice, who knows who or what it is, wishes us well, but has no confidence in our future. Our stories all end in fire and Armageddon is what she says. And I feel like that's I wanted to bring in that alien entity looking at humanity as just a species gone horribly wrong. So yeah, that's a really long answer, but the three voices, interacting with one another was part of the desire. And that's the nature of the diatribe. Like this long answer, the film is this long kind of meditation, and these three voices kind of playing against one another and riffing on one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you for your long answer. Actually, it was interesting. And yeah, as you said, this is a film that is part of a bigger project. Somehow is like somehow the sequel, or is another chapter of that is following your other film, Continents Quiver as Memories Erupt into Earth Flames, that we have screened last year. I can see I can see a lot of elements that are connecting the two films, even some images like the satellites, for example. Those big satellites that you film also in the other film. I don't remember if they were exactly the last image in the other film, or if, yeah, so it's like you leave us with those satellites and then we come back again with this element in this second film. And also some elements of the style, or this choice that you take also in this film, of having at first a lot of points of view, as you said, like the three narrators give us different perspectives on the same themes, and it creates this sort of dialogue, exactly, even though they are not talking directly one to another, but it's like the dialogue happens in the mind of the person who watches the film, probably. And the other aspect is also some stylistic choice somehow. Like you in your film, you mix a lot of different kind of footage, different kind of how to say, registers, also different kind of voices, very different kind of images. We find found footage, images that you film, or photographs that you take, and images that are affected somehow, like that have some special effects that you put on. So in the end, I have the impression that your films are really well orchestrated mixture of fragments somehow. And what I wanted to ask you is what do you find in your style, in this style, that is it just of course this is somehow an obvious question, but I'm just inviting you to talk more about this style. Is it just stylistic choice, or is this choice something that is telling also something about your way of seeing reality?
Yeah, no, I think it's both in a way, definitely both. When you think about, I mean, this whole series, like you were definitely, you remember it perfectly. It ends, that first film ends with the image of the Very Large Array, those giant satellites out in New Mexico. And it's as if, I guess your question of like why it is this way, it's like I'm thinking about these things as visual threads, to kind of give it a visual metaphor. That come from sources. So one of the threads is me taking a camera out into the world and observing, just like I drove out to the Very Large Array and I just got there, and those images of there's this giant storm in the distance, and the satellites start moving, and nobody's out there. I mean, you're in the middle of nowhere, and there's nobody out there. A security guard came at one point, told me I had to move. This person drove out of the desert. I guess it's obviously being observed, but otherwise I was alone. And so that's one thread. It's just taking the camera out into the world, into these spaces, and kind of like these visual that create a space for an audio thread, which is essentially the voiceover, the written, whether it be poetry, whether it be fragments of these microfiction elements, the science fiction alien entity, or documentary impulse pieces. You know, there are moments where I talk, like in some ways, it's almost like a science film. You know, there are elements of the audio thread of talking about the history of the universe, you know. But there's another visual thread of the archival images and activating those in such a way to put them in dialogue with the contemporary footage, which again is like a traditional film essay. Maybe the most famous example would be, and it's a film that I just have watched so many times and always think about in new ways, Alain René's Night and Fog, which is a benchmark film to represent the unrepresentable, the Holocaust, and going from the past to the present, to the past to the present. So that's like a device that's central to my thinking, my filmmaking thinking, you know, where here I am in a large array observing these satellites, or at the Trinity site, you know, where in the desert, Jornada del Muerto desert, where the atom bomb was detonated, and then activate the archival images and put these in dialogue. But then there's this film that is new for me, which was exciting, because it's also, to me, the whole point of the essay film is this chance to explore. You don't have to be locked into a very strict, there's no strict plan, and you can explore to your liking. You go where your curiosity takes you. And so this animation sequence was really born out of this desire to have these visual images that were beyond my capabilities. So I made some very basic animations. And then this friend of mine, Patrick Nugent, who is the collaborator who does these, he's an artist of the highest order in this tradition of arts and animation. And so when he was like up for collaborating, I just was so happy. I was like, he was someone who could create in visual, you know, imagery what I was thinking of, visual representation, the beginning of the universe, you know, like that's a tall order. And it echoes with the atom bomb, this explosion. And he created those amazing images. And once he did create them, I realized this is like the heart of the film. And so we open with that one animation, and it closes and throughout. And then he took some of my primitive animations and made them more beautiful. He made that sort of entity that floats through the screen. That's our alien life form, you know, the consciousness. So that's another major thread. And then the last thread in this one was the still photography. And you know, there's just, you could talk for hours and hours and years, and it spend a lifetime thinking about the difference between still images and what's possible there in the frozen image, and you know, this versus the moving image where things are like traces, you know, moving through light and time. And it seemed like a film that's dealing with a fragment of a moment, right? Like July 16, 1945, in this specific moment when the atom is split. The photograph seemed like the appropriate thing to bring into the film. So like those are all like these threads, you know, and they cycle, we go through them. And that's just the visual threads. The other threads are Oppenheimer, that alien entity, my own sort of personal essay voice. So yeah, that's also a long answer, but you know, I guess there's a lot of these threads in the film.
No, it's thank you. And yeah, definitely the impression is always with your film. I mean, at least I talk for those that I have watched, is that really reality is a composition of a lot of different layers. So it's and they all come together and have a dialogue, one with each other. So yeah. And this is reflected, of course, in the style that you choose for them. And yeah, now I come to another question that came to my mind. Like, what's your creative process? Like, how is there a way that you apply somehow for each one of your projects to work on, or is it more does it more come as a spontaneous process that always changes?
Yeah, and another answer where I feel like I could go on forever, because it's like both of those things. And in terms of, sometimes there's a real strong plan, other times I don't even realize what it is I'm doing. I'm just working, and then later figure out how it'll manifest. Like, I mean, I guess I would say in the broadest most general sense, Laura, all of these things, it's just about, they really just begin with, I'm curious about some problem, some thing in the world, some moment in time, or these like bigger, like the opposites. It's millennia, and it's past, present, and future. So what this guy Timothy Morton calls hyper objects, like they're so grand and big that they go beyond just the simple thing you could put in your hand, so to speak. So it just starts with curiosity. It's like, I'm very curious about these problems. I have no special expertise in any of them, but that's the beauty of the essay film. In general, it's not about expertise. And even what you said about reality, I think is so key, because there are competing realities and competing ways of understanding history and our place in the world. And even with the work I'm doing now, a multi-species perspective, trying at least to imagine what a multi-species perspective would be. In other words, beyond our human, our subjective humanity, what if we could try and look outside of that? It might even be imperative at this moment in time, with all that's going on in the world. So yeah, that's the broadest part of the answer, is just curiosity. But then, yeah, at some point it gets structured in some way where I, say, okay, like when I went to New Mexico, and it's really, if it sounds like I'm being vague, it's really true that it's all of these things. Like I was going to New Mexico and filming and not even sure yet where the project would end or go. I just knew, I mean, very seriously, I just had to go to the deserts of New Mexico, to where the Trinity site, and just go there. And the same with the very large array. Like I just wanted to go there, where these scientists are so committed to listening to the sounds of the universe, the cosmic background radiation that comes in, to try and understand, our place in the universe. Like, radical stuff. And I'm not a scientist, but I guess I share the endless curiosity that scientists must have. So it's like going there and then seeing what happens. I mean, I made an entire film that way. I went to the rural mountains of Haiti to film about voodoo, because I was studying the history of colonization in the Americas, and realized how central the Haitian people are to liberation and freedom in. So I learned as much Haitian Creole as I could and prepared, but I had no plan. I think it's fair to say that my plan oftentimes is that I don't have a plan. And I mean, I argue like even a discipline to that, to like not get stuck into my own idea of like, this is what it's going to be. It really is about curiosity. What am I going to encounter and learn and experience? And my films are experience, they're like reflections of the process. But there was another note there that crossed my mind to answer your question. I think I lost it. I remember the other key point, actually, Laura, is that this Anthropocene cycle also essentially activates a personal archive. In other words, like I have at this point, it's pushing 20 years footage that's just been saved on these hard drives or film stock, whatever. And certainly in Continent's Quiver, but also in New Mexico Deathwish Diatribe, there are some images in those films that were part of other projects where I was traveling to different parts of the Americas, or Haiti, or the West Coast, Northwest Coast, and reactivating those images. I think it's almost like the way you can activate and repurpose those images, you can with a personal archive. Like, maybe I took this shot of the satellites in the end of Continent's Quiver and had one idea for it, but in New Mexico initial plan. So I think it's just part of that process of being curious, and then this process of accretion, like these things just pile up or add up. Sort of like by time it's just covered in these like images, cyanotypes I'm creating. I don't even know what I'm going to do with them yet, but I'm sure they'll end up in a film somehow. It's just part of this process of thinking in images, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's very fascinating to hear about this way of working. Like, and actually, I need to say that it's I think you can perceive this. unpredictable aspect that is behind your way of working in your works, because it's the impression, at least to me, is that the one of assisting to a process that is happening in the moment, like you are living the process of making the film in the film somehow. This is what I felt, and yeah, it totally makes sense with what you said. Yeah, one thing it came to my mind while you were talking is you told about this interest for a multi-species perspective. And that's interesting because right before you, we interviewed Lauritz Sonne, who is also sending you his greetings. And he presented here his film Passering in Time. And he was also, like, this theme came out a bit also while talking with him. And as you said, probably it's also true that this is really something that is part of our times, like the fact that probably we as humans, we realize that we cannot watch at the reality just from the human perspective, as we tried to do for centuries and millenniums. And so it's like this is just something I thought while you were talking, because probably we are starting to feel the need to really explore perspectives that are not human. And as you did, for example, with your fictional character, like trying to enter in the point of view of someone who is not human, and that is observing us from outside. And yeah, I find this interesting, like probably is the way to to try to solve our problems, like try to go out from the ones, like from the point of view that created these problems. So like the only way is to observe from outside, probably.
And Lauritz, I should say, Lauritz-san, I met him a few years ago at a festival in South Carolina, and ever since we have become really good friends. I invited him to come and present work here in North Carolina, where I live. And that film specifically, Passering in Time, is, I just love his film. He thinks through, maybe as you say, from this multi-species perspective. I remember something he said in one of the talks that, and our films, I guess, are so similar that we end up, so we have these opportunities to chat, or not that they're similar, but they're thinking through similar subjects. His films are so beautiful in a way that, my films aren't. His films are just gorgeous and very meditative. But Passing in Time, where I remember him saying, what counts as knowledge? And that film asks that question, what counts as knowledge? So even if we take a human perspective, which ultimately, we're here trapped in our bodies, I think part of just the critical thinking component of, well, how are we coming to know the world? How are we coming to know our place in it, or other species? And, Passing in Time is a great example of, you see these hands, these human hands, they grab the bird, they study the bird, they hold the bird like an object, and then write something in a notebook. And you see all this happen, just in close-ups, and it's not really commented on. It's just there for the viewer to think through, and then the bird is let go. And, it's just asking us to think about that question, what counts as knowledge? And, maybe attempting to look at, I think that's just a smart thing to do. Look at a problem, try and look at it from a new perspective, and then kind of what you were saying too, to solve these issues. It's this phrase that I recall from, again, Timothy Morton. He's this thinker who deals with the Anthropocene, and I think his writings have influenced my own, thinking for sure. But this phrase, like the detective is the criminal. We are here trying to figure out, collectively, so to speak, well, what are the problems that are causing the sixth mass extinction event? What are the problems causing the rise of CO2 in the atmosphere, methane gas, greenhouse gas in general? What are the problems causing, the west coast of the American continent to be on fire? Well, the detective is the criminal. Like, we're the problem, and I think that's what collectively as a species, we're having this internal battle, denial even, right? Like no, that can't be true. But the reality of the Anthropocene, right? And it's not that we're all equally culpable, but as a species, we're stuck on the planet, and that whole idea of just thinking of these things from different perspectives can help us maybe make productive or smart decisions. I don't know, and I don't even say that my films are trying to do that, but thinking of Lauritz's films, that all came to mind.
Sorry, Georg, I didn't hear the very last thing that you said because of the audio.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, aren't necessarily trying to solve a problem per se, but certainly engaging a problem. I was really speaking a lot there to Lauritz's films as well, which they implicitly ask these very big and very important questions, and they're very much engaging these issues of the Anthropocene.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, my last question is if you are working on new projects now, if what are you working on at the moment, or if you are even just experimenting with something new?
So so I'm definitely working on a bunch of films that are part of this Anthropocene cycle. The next one in that cycle is called These Sight-Altering Spells Sometimes Speak. That film is essentially done. It's like it's in that final stage of I just need to get ready to send it out into the world. So that was the big thing I'd been working on kind of pre-pandemic. And it basically folds the 6th mass extinction event, that I've been talking about a little bit. It folds that over the Norse mythologies, and specifically this tale of Ragnarok, which reflects very much our own reality of rising oceans, earth on fire, all the gods are slain, and it doesn't end well. And so just kind of playing with these two tales on two different time scales, mythological time, geological time, human time scale. So that film essentially is done, but it's a part of that process, this Anthropocene cycle films. And the next couple in there's one that's called Das Mars Project, which I did start during the pandemic, and really is almost pure science fiction, but not really. It's like a speculative science fiction, something like Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle, which is totally rooted in historical reality. And science fiction they call the John Barr point, is like this trope where at a moment in history there's a split, and one goes towards a horrible dystopia, and the other timeline goes into a potential, more of a utopian possibility. I use this device in this project, Das Mars Project, that's dealing with this idea of colonizing Mars, and very much to think through the problems of the Anthropocene here on Earth. And that's the whole tradition of like fiction on Mars, was always to think about progressive possibilities against the more conservative elements of Earth that lead to our collective. And that whole project, though, I got to say, was, this is like a long answer, but, it was inspired deeply the week that George Floyd was murdered, here in Minneapolis. That same week, that police officer killed George Floyd, a spaceship was sent out to outer space, a private company, SpaceX, Elon Musk. And these, and nothing against those two individuals, they just happened to be these two white men getting thrust out into outer space. And I thought about the way that people were reacting to these two events in the moment, right? And then I thought about history, the way history plays out 500 years from now, which is a nice number. You think about 500 years ago, roughly, Columbus and colonization of the Americas. 500 years from now, very likely, corporate entities will be colonizing Mars, resource extraction camps, and profiting mightily from it. And it sounds like science fiction, but I think it's, even studying it, I think it's very possible. And how that moment in history, I thought of a dystopian future where George Floyd isn't remembered at all. What's remembered are these private corporations sending, astronauts into outer space for the benefit of, not scientific exploration, but profits, thinking of this, again, dystopian future. And by the way, this whole history of the title Das Mars Project comes from Werner von Braun's, the Nazi SS officer who develops the rocket and later comes out to actually places like New Mexico. He's conscripted by the United States government, this Operation Paperclip it was called, and he becomes the US rocket program and writes a book called The Mars Project, Das Mars Project, to colonize Mars. And he leads NASA's space program. He's the first director of the Space Flight Center. So I thought about, oh man, this history is not science fiction. This history of fascism in America is very real, and I remember seeing these images of Trump and Pence, in Cape Canaveral cheering on the rocket ship. And I just thought of Philip K. Dick and the novel, The Man in the High Castle. And I thought, these are images of fascism, he's a proto-fascist individual, Trump is, and has many followers and believers. And I think science fiction is that key place to think about the present in a different way. So that's a big project I'm working on. That's part of this Anthropocene cycle. And then one more, and I'll stop talking, but this is the other big one. It's the Multi-Species Journal of the Plague Years, which is very much, maybe it'll be the film I never stop working on, because the plague years began, depending who you ask, for indigenous people of the Americas, the plague years began over 500 years ago. The plague years, the history of slavery in the Americas, like, where do you define the plague years, but where does it begin? Where does it end? But so I've been meditating on this, writing about it, filming, creating these images that deal with the experiences of surviving or being quarantined through this coronavirus. And it started studying birds, believe it or not. Speaking of Lauritz's films that deal with birds, it started in January, studying birds and thinking about migration, patterns of migration, and went from the bird counts to the death counts very quickly. By March, that's where the project transitioned. So I'm trying to stay focused. It's very hard, I think, for everybody working in this time. I think, near impossible. It's a hard time to be focused. And what is it, yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm trying as I can to work on 2 films.
Yeah. No, thank you for your long answers. Actually, now we are curious about your next projects and hope to be able to see them soon. And yeah, as last thing, I just wanted to ask to Dominic, who is behind the computer, if there is any question from the public, because yeah, the chat is open. So if anyone has any question to ask to Georg.
No, there's nothing in the chat, Laura. I don't know whether Lisa has any questions.
Okay. So if no one has questions, I say thank you, Georg.
Thank you. I just say thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Georg. And it's always interesting to talk with you. And we will be able to watch your film for 1 more week online. So for those who has not watched it yet, please go and watch it together with all the selection. And I hope we will be able to meet again.
And Laura, me too, of course. And I just want to thank you and Dominic again for facilitating the festival. And as I said when we started,